It was the umpteenth time Mr. Harper had noticed Carl slacking off work, and today was the last straw. He had seen the reports and how he was severely underperforming compared to his other colleagues. As Mr. Harper fired Carl, he wouldn't let him get a word in, not even allowing him to explain himself. Maybe Mr. Harper should have let him, but he had been done with Carl's antics. "You'll regret this decision," Carl had said before storming off, leaving Mr. Jonathan Harper standing in his office. He had a small smile on his face as firing Carl had gone off without a hitch. Probably just an empty threat, Jonathan muttered to himself, shrugging off Carl's words. Before we start our story, smash the like button, make sure to subscribe and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new stories. Jonathan truly believed firing Carl had been the best course of action. The guy had been underperforming for quite a while, and Jonathan could finally make a schedule with competent people to improve production as soon as next week. That was until he felt something heavy settle in his gut. "Shit!" Jonathan cursed to himself. Though he had seen Carl leave his office, Carl could be wreaking all sorts of havoc at this right moment. He immediately sprang into action, quickly rushing out of his office and following the way Carl had gone. However, where could he have gone? This wasn't just a factory with one exit or a singular door. He had to think of something quick. Just as he wanted to yell out in frustration, he'd got it. He knew exactly where to go. Jonathan knew he had to move fast. He turned around and dashed toward his destination. "Sorry, pardon me," he said as he moved past his other employees, or if he had to weave through a group of them. He pushed open the door, bursting inside as the two men sitting inside turned around, looking startled at the sudden noise. Upon seeing their boss, Mr. Harper, they both let out a breath. "You scared the bejesus out of me, boss. Is everything all right?" Jonathan's employee, Leroy, asked, still trying to gather himself from the scare. Yes, everything is all right. I just need to see some footage," Jonathan said, walking inside the security camera room. Whatever Carl had done must be visible on one of these cameras. "Leroy, Thomas, you can both have your breaks. I have to check something. Alone," he said dismissively. Jonathan immediately went to the time Carl had been in his office and hit play. He saw Carl enter his office and, after some speeding up, saw him open it with a slam as he emerged angrily from Jonathan's office. All the evidence was right there. He only had to spot whatever he did that would make Jonathan regret his decision. "What are you doing?" he asked himself, as no one else was in the room. He tried to find if he had pushed any buttons, unscrewed anything, or meddled with something, but he had just been walking in a straight line. He had gotten his stuff from his locker and walked off. The action made Jonathan frown, but sag with relief. It had only just been an empty threat. Or at least that is what Jonathan now thought. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as Jonathan waited for his security team. Alone with his thoughts, he replayed Carl's departure, searching it for missed details. Yet, without solid evidence, Carl's ominous warning felt more like a ghost haunting him. The uncertainty was maddening. Luckily, it was just Leroy and Thomas returning from the small break Jonathan had given them. Back in his office, Jonathan tried to refocus on his work, but Carl's words wormed their way through his thoughts, persistent and unsettling. Jonathan's intuition screamed that he was overlooking something crucial. With a heavy heart, he decided it was time to leave no stone unturned, to look where he hadn't yet. Jonathan took a detour, walking past the machinery Carl had often handled. His eyes scanned each device, searching for anything amiss. Yet, everything was as it should be. No signs of tampering, no sabotage. The factory hummed with the usual rhythm of productivity. Was he just chasing shadows, driven by paranoia of Carl's unsettling words? Jonathan approached his employees, seeking any shred of insight into Carl's behavior. "Anything odd about Carl?" he casually asked those who worked closely with him. Their responses varied, but nothing substantial came up until Bryce mentioned Carl's frequent, unaccounted absences. Bryce's words stuck with Jonathan as he mulled over Carl's mysterious disappearances. If Carl was often missing, what was he actually doing? Yet before Jonathan could spiral, another worker chimed in, joking about Carl's legendary pee break. Jonathan couldn't help but crack a small smile, pondering the casual dismissal. Jonathan wanted to believe there was nothing more to it, convincing himself Carl's behavior was part of his lackluster work ethic. As Jonathan interacted with more employees, their unanimous lack of concern over Carl's behavior comforted him. Jonathan settled back into the rhythm of his responsibilities, the ordeal with Carl moving to the back of his mind. He focused on the here and now, the factory's operations running smoothly under his watch. However, unbeknownst to him, he overlooked a crucial detail in Carl's pattern of behavior. Carl's parting words, once thought to be an empty threat, bore a weighty truth that Jonathan had yet to uncover. Alone again, Jonathan couldn't shake off the mention of Carl's locker, still filled with his belongings. Why hadn't Carl come to clear it out? What if Carl's warning was about something hidden there? A cold wave of dread washed over him, the weight of Carl's parting words suddenly heavy in the air. The possibility of overlooking something dangerous filled him with an urgent need to act. Jonathan couldn't sit still. Without wasting another second, he stood up, his resolve hardening. He had to make a beeline for the locker room. The idea of finding something dangerous among Carl's things made his heart beat faster. Jonathan decided he needed backup. He went to the security room and found Thomas. "I need your help," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. As they walked to the locker room, Jonathan explained Carl's unsettling parting words and his growing sense of unease. Thomas, now serious, suggested, "Should we call the police if it's dangerous?" Jonathan hesitated but shook his head. "Let's see what we find first." The locker room was buzzing with activity. Jonathan and Thomas exchanged looks, silently agreeing to wait until the room emptied. When the last worker left, silence filled the room. Jonathan's hand trembled as he reached for the key. At Carl's locker, Jonathan handed Thomas the key. Thomas hesitated, but, with Jonathan's encouragement, turned it. The lock clicked loudly, and the door swung open. Inside were Carl's personal items and work-related belongings, a mundane collection at first glance. Jonathan noted the need to clear it out soon, but Thomas's sharp intake of breath caught his attention. "It's my watch! I lost this a month ago," Thomas exclaimed, his voice a mix of surprise and relief. Jonathan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The tension unwound, leaving them with an anticlimactic sense of relief. Carl's locker seemed to hold no dark secrets after all. They searched further, finding odd items that didn't seem to belong to someone working at the factory. While curious, nothing screamed danger. Among Carl's belongings, Jonathan found bottles with complicated labels, possibly chemicals. He handled them carefully but concluded they were likely for cleaning, not dangerous. After a thorough search, Jonathan and Thomas put everything back and locked the locker. Whatever Carl had been warning about didn't seem as dire as it had sounded. Jonathan thanked Thomas for his help, and they parted ways. Back in his office, Jonathan picked up his phone and dialed Carl's number, hoping for answers. It went straight to voicemail. Frustrated, he tapped on the desk, then tried again, but the result was the same. Deciding on a different approach, he drafted an email laying out the findings from Carl's locker and issuing an ultimatum: clear it out by the end of the week or face the consequences. Carl's reply came swiftly. "I'm out of town for 10 days. Don't touch the locker," it read. Jonathan's initial satisfaction turned to anger. How dare Carl dictate terms from afar? Yet, his gut stopped him from acting out of spite. Carl's parting warning lingered in his mind, keeping his anger in check. A week passed, and the locker remained untouched. Then, complaints rolled in about malfunctioning machinery. Jonathan's stomach sank when he realized it was the machine Carl had operated. Determined to find the cause, he inspected it but found no obvious issues. Carl's ominous words replayed in his head, fueling his suspicions. He decided to investigate further, heading to the connected storage chamber. The moment he unlocked the chamber, an overwhelming stench hit him, making his eyes water. Inside, he glimpsed bulging white growths clinging to the walls. Workers who accompanied him recoiled, coughing and gagging. One vomited, adding to the chaos. Jonathan slammed the door shut, cursing Carl under his breath, convinced he was behind this nightmare. Back in his office, Jonathan called the police, demanding action against Carl. However, without concrete proof, they refused to intervene. Furious, he paced his office, calling Carl repeatedly, but every attempt ended in voicemail. The silence only deepened his anger. Meanwhile, the situation worsened. The stench seeped into the factory, disrupting work and slowing machines. Productivity plummeted as employees struggled to cope with the unbearable conditions. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Jonathan reluctantly decided to shut down the factory temporarily. It was a painful but necessary step to address the chaos and preserve any evidence of Carl's suspected sabotage. Now, Jonathan could only wait, his frustration growing as he planned his next move. Carl would return in 3 days, and Jonathan vowed to get answers and justice. On Monday, Jonathan and a small group of trusted employees, including Thomas, gathered at the factory entrance. The air was tense, thick with anticipation about Carl's reaction to the chaos of the past week. When Carl's car pulled up, he stepped out, confusion on his face at the unusual welcoming committee. But as he met Jonathan's gaze, understanding dawned, and a smug smirk spread across his face, igniting Jonathan's anger. "This is on you!" Jonathan exploded, gesturing to the silent factory. "You sabotaged us! I had to shut everything down because of your mess!" Carl raised his hands defensively, denying any wrongdoing. His calm demeanor caught Jonathan off guard as he explained there had been a misunderstanding. Carl revealed that months earlier he had discovered fast-spreading mold in his machine, threatening the factory's safety. He had tried to handle it discreetly, using chemicals stored in his locker, but his efforts had eaten into his work hours, causing his productivity to drop. "I didn't want to cause panic, and every time I tried to talk to you, you were too busy," Carl said. Jonathan felt a pang of guilt as Carl explained how he had worked alone to combat the mold. Jonathan realized he had been too quick to judge. "I'm sorry, Carl," he said sincerely, offering him his job back and asking for his help fixing the factory. Carl hesitated, but ultimately agreed, understanding the gravity of the situation. As they prepared to re-enter the factory, Thomas accused Carl of stealing his watch. Carl looked at his wrist, realized the mix-up. They owned identical watches, and quickly cleared the misunderstanding. With tensions resolved, Carl led the group inside to face the mold problem head-on. Carl immediately got to work, expertly mixing chemicals and treating the affected areas. To everyone's amazement, the mold began receding within hours, revealing clean walls and restoring the factory's interior. Carl moved efficiently, demonstrating a deep understanding of both the mold and the factory. With the mold under control, Carl turned his attention to the malfunctioning machinery. He moved through the factory with confidence, making adjustments and repairs that soon brought the silent machines back to life. Jonathan watched in awe, his earlier resentment replaced with gratitude. "I should have listened to you," he admitted, apologizing for his rash actions. As the day progressed, the factory returned to its normal operations thanks to Carl's efforts. Jonathan, recognizing Carl's value, reinstated him with a well-deserved raise. Carl's return marked a fresh start for the factory, built on better communication and newfound mutual respect.